Hello everybody and welcome to the second Gym 1537's Metaphysical Tools for Transformation podcast. Again, I'm joined by my wife, Meremystic.
Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about the concept of the transformational moment, and it's something that I think ties in quite nicely with the concept of tools for transformation. And before we begin talking about that, I thought it would be nice, Jim, if you could define for us the term transformation and tell us how that differs from ordinary change.
Oh, I'd love to. Straight away, I think the easiest and most succinct way of talking about this would be the metaphor of the caterpillar. Okay, we've all seen a caterpillar in that it crawls around and it eats leaves, and then what does it do? It goes into a cocoon. And it comes out as a beautiful butterfly. That's a transformation. That's a huge transformation. When we're speaking of the difference between transformation and change, I'd like to say that change is more incremental, perhaps more subtle, even trivial or momentary. Like the idea of, I want to change the curtains, I want to change my hairstyle, I want to change my clothes. So there's a huge difference between change and transformation. Perhaps the easiest way to think of it is that transformation is a profound and utter change.
Does it mean the same thing as, say, ascending or raising our level of consciousness? And when we talk about those things in spiritual terms, is that transformation as well?
Yes, definitely. When we're speaking of it in spiritual terms, that sense of really transforming our consciousness, of rising, of ascending, of really trying to come above the fray of our smaller self, we could say, or of our personality or ego. Absolutely that ties into transformation from a spiritual perspective.
So, now that we understand what we mean by transformation, can you tell us what is the transformational moment?
Well, I think a good way to think of it, or to absorb it quickly, is I would call it the aha moment. That moment where we say, aha, I get it. A huge moment of realization, of clarity, of decision, of really being affected in a big and deep way. Those moments happen for all of us. We could say, I don't want to go through this anymore. I don't want to take this anymore. We really feel that aha moment where there's a sense that every part of our being is coming together with a unified energy that is transformative.
Now, what types of events can trigger a transformational moment?
There's so many things that we could talk about, profound ones and more mundane ones, which I think would be fine to cover a couple of them. Let's say if we're in a negative relationship, or we've been in negative relationships, plural, for a long period of time. That transformational moment could be where we say, look, I have had it with this. I've had it with being treated badly. I've had it with not being validated and loved and nurtured in the way that I deserve. And that transformational moment could be the point where somebody says, that's it. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. You could think of it in a job situation. Say, for example, somebody is underappreciated in their job. They're treated badly or even abusively by a boss. Coworkers are against them. And they take it because they have to pay the bills. And then they reach a point where they say, I have to make this change. This is not what I'm worth. I'm worth more. I've got to do this. I've got to change it. One more little example could even be standing in front of the mirror and saying, wow, I'm very dissatisfied with my appearance. I've picked up weight. I've been careless with that. And I really want to change that.
Now, what you said from a spiritual sense and a practical sense, what are some events that could trigger it from a spiritual sense?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones that I think represents this very well is the concept of the near-death experience.
Mm-hmm.
And with a near-death experience, it's something that, say for you and I, is commonplace. For certain people, it's really unusual, or they consider it to be, is this true or is it not true? But certainly for many people it is true. So say when somebody has a near-death experience, and their experiences may vary somewhat, but there's certain things that we could kind of speak of that would be basically uniform or predictable. They are outside of their body. They go through a tunnel of white light. brighter than they've ever seen, brighter than they've ever imagined. They feel a level of unconditional love and peace that is humanly indescribable. And then, with certain people who do that, they don't want to come back. But say a spirit guide, one of their angels would tell them, perhaps your business isn't finished on earth. There are things you still have to do. You have to go back. Now, sometimes they might want to come back. They're told that they have a mission or something left that is unfinished, and they're anxious to come back. What's interesting about near-death experience is that so many of the people who have gone through it come back transformed, humbled, more in service to other people, less egotistical, less selfish, less arrogant. And we find that with the near-death experience, that a sense of spiritual awakening and the sense that there is something so much greater that governs and guides this universe than just our little world, our personality, our ego. I want to have this dinner. I want, this person to like me. That there's something so much bigger and more profound.
What about, say, brushes with death or other event, like a car accident or something, or other events? Can those trigger the transformational moment?
Absolutely. Say a near-death experience could be really transformational for people. I've known people who have been in serious car accidents and survived, thankfully, and it transformed them forever.
Even if they didn't see the tunnel of light and the...
Exactly. Even if they didn't see the tunnel of light and they didn't leave their body and told that they had to come back and that sort of thing, that a lot of people that I've known who have had those kind of near-death car accidents have come out of them more courageous, less fearful, less timid, more like, okay, I've gone through this. Why should I be afraid of what the neighbors think of me? Why should I be afraid if I'm not the most popular kid on the block? That sort of thing. And so that could be one of those experiences for sure.
In the sense of just recognizing that life's too short, so we have to...
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Life's too short, and it sort of awakens a person to the idea that, okay, they've come that close to losing it, sort of that old cliche, why sweat the small stuff at that point?
I can agree with that.
Sure.
What about the concept of changing for other people? Say if someone had a child and decided then that they wanted to be a different person because of that experience.
I think that could be really transformational as well. Like, let's say, for example, you could take a woman and she didn't have a real focus, or her focus was maybe self-centered. And then she has a child, and all of a sudden she realizes in a big aha kind of way, I am responsible for this life. I want to make sure that I give this child the very, very best opportunities in life, and that could be hugely transformational. Even the idea of a partnership, a relationship that is really enriching and positive and transformational in and of itself because of what the two people attain, what the two people share, that could be motivational too.
Now, how does the transformational moment differ from other types of goal setting? Because it sounds like that you're saying when you have this moment, you realize you have to change. So when we set goals, obviously we're doing that for the same purpose, to try to affect a change in our life. But how does the transformational moment differ from regular goal setting, like, say, New Year's resolutions?
Well, I think all of us, of course, have made New Year's resolutions because we're culturally supposed to. However, most of us would, I'm assuming, agree straight away that New Year's resolutions are usually discarded almost as soon as they're made, within a week, within a month. So New Year's resolutions are certainly trivial oftentimes and very, very seldom adhered to, at least for any length of time. Now, a transformational moment, of course, is that aha moment that changes everything. But if we look at that in juxtaposition to goals, come about in a more incremental way. Like, say you could have a goal to clean the house. Okay, and you say, I'm going to clean this house 15 minutes a day. And you put in 15 minutes a day and you do that for a year and you see how much better your house looks and it gets more organized. But that's different because it isn't born of an aha moment, of a moment where you really get, this is a game-changing moment for me in the big picture. So it's more, goals can be incremental, and ultimately goals that are achieved over a long period of time or even a medium period of time could then lead to a transformation as well. But they're different in that sense.
Okay. Do you always recognize a transformational moment when it happens? Do you recognize that this is a moment that's going to transform my life?
Well, I would say sometimes yes and sometimes no. And I think there's both a positive and a negative to that, and let's cover it. In a big way, on the positive level, let's say that there is a realization, like say when we talk about the near-death experience, when we talk about, say, an aha moment to say, I have to get back into school. I want my master's degree. I want my PhD. I have been waiting for all of these years to achieve that. I've sat back. I haven't done it. And that sort of building up of the energy within, psychologically, subconsciously, emotionally, this sort of culmination process where it all comes together in that aha moment, that's one that could be really recognized. But say sometimes we don't recognize them. And I think a perfect example is that a lot of times when we're embarking on a choice that, for lack of a better term, is not good for us. Okay, we can rationalize it all we want.
No other way to put it.
Right. I mean, we could talk about it that nothing is good and nothing is bad from a cryptic point of view. Okay?
A spiritual point of view.
Right, from a spiritual point of view. And there's truth in that. But if we're speaking of it in terms of a choice that debilitates our life and creates really horrible consequences, oftentimes we make those choices and we deny that it could potentially be transformational. Let me give you an example. Say a woman meets a married man. She's attracted to that married man, and she thinks, look, I don't want to really be in a deep commitment right now. This guy's married. I'm not going to have to cook for him or take care of him. So I'm going to play with this, not realizing that in certain instances that could lead to falling in love with the married man, having your life fall apart because emotionally you can't have him after you're hooked and addicted and in love with him. And that could be a transformational moment that wasn't really realized at first through denial and through trying to rationalize and trivialize what the choice could be. I think another simple example is the first time somebody takes a drink, say they're 20.
Or uses drugs.
Or uses drugs or just cocaine or whatever, that they don't see themselves or don't want to see themselves as potentially in rehab 20 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't think about those. We don't think about those at all. Do transformational moments ever happen in a reading?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's something that is, I don't want to say that it's every single moment is transformational, but it's frequent, at least in the readings that I do. In many, many ways, when spirit comes through, and we talked about this in the last podcast, that when our loved ones from the spirit world come through me as a medium and communicate with the client, it could be hugely transformational. I mean, it's some of the most moving moments that I've ever had in doing readings for over 30 years. It's just at times overwhelming. And it could be transformational in many ways that, say, the loved one from the other side is issuing a warning that is quite profound, speaking of things that the client already knows in a profound way about the love that's there, the changes that need to happen, the mistakes that they made, the atonement that they're seeking. And in a more conventional clairvoyant way, oftentimes there will be a transformational moment of realizing that, okay, the client's life has come to a certain place. Whether for better or for worse, there needs to be more than a change, a transformation, something that will absolutely lift that person out of the pattern or the cycle that they're in for the better, hopefully.
Do people ever come to you because they sense that they've had a transformational moment and don't know what to do with it?
Oh, a lot of times, certainly. Like, say, for example, back to the spirit medium concept, where certain people will say, I dreamt of my grandmother. She was talking to me. Was it her? It seemed like it was her. And it was like it was really a game changer for them. After it happened, they couldn't stop thinking about it, and they come in that instance. Sometimes they may see a spirit, or they may see spirits, and then it's like, why did I see that spirit? I haven't done that before. That could be very transformational. Or the idea that they feel that something has happened in their life, circumstantially, whether for the better or the worse, say a death of a loved one, a catastrophe or a tragedy that's happened that they can't understand why this happened. Even the culmination of looking at their choices in ways that they feel has to change beyond change, but into transformation.
And that kind of begs the question that okay, if we have this transformational moment, that what happens afterwards? It's kind of like, now that I've had this, what do I do with it?
Well, that's a really good point, because the aha moment, as we're speaking of it, is usually quite profound and exciting and, I guess you could say, happening. Okay, but then after that, you're not going to have that exact same feeling every day.
Right.
Then after that, it's the idea of, what do I do with that moment? Now, sometimes it's a change in consciousness where, let's say, a person really rises spiritually, and they're going to stay in that consciousness. They're done with darkness, they're done with hatred, they're done with resentment, they're just done with it, okay? But let's say a lot of transformational moments require putting in effort that would be step by step. Like if we're using the example of, say, somebody who had the transformational moment of quitting drugs and quitting drinking, and then they decide they're going to quit. Well, then they're going to have to resist temptation. They're going to have to deal with counseling. They're going to have to deal with, ultimately, the underlying issues that help to set this up and facilitate it. So oftentimes after the transformational moment, there needs to be a plan and follow through, not just the idea of, we've had this moment and ta-da, everything is done.
And what about a support system to help move that transformational moment along?
I think the support system is hugely important, because where we talk about the old cliche of no man is an island, and sometimes cliches lose their meaning because they've been said so often, they're so ubiquitous, but when we re-look at them, they have a renewed meaning. Are we really an island? If we were, we'd be able to reproduce asexually. We would be able to bury ourselves without no help when we have left our bodies. So, of course, we're all interconnected. Physics proves that, and spiritually, of course, that's well known. So the support system, I think, is hugely important. Now, I don't think there's a preset number. Is it one person or 10 or 5? Or different people may even have different degrees of playing into that support system. But certainly that support system is vital, because I don't think any of us can really do it on our own.
And we just need to understand what it is that we're needing at yeah. I mean, it may be mom, it may be having a psychic reading. We don't always know.
We don't always know, or it could be both. It could be several things. I mean, it could be love from a parent. It could be a therapist. It could be books. It could be a best friend. It could be your lover, your partner, a psychic reading. All of those things could factor in. And, of course, that would vary person by person and situation by situation based on what the transformational moment actually is.
And the person themselves, because obviously everybody's a unique individual.
Sure.
So there's not just one way for it
absolutely
to happen.
Depending on their karma, their lessons, their dharma, what they're here to learn, and that would be, of course, variable.
Now, we've talked about the concept of change coming from these transformational moments. Do all transformational moments lead to lasting change?
They don't. Some do and some don't. And you know, we like to think of transformational meaning that it would always affect a lasting change. Now, there's, different possibilities. There are some that do lead to that lasting change, and that change could last a lifetime or multiple lifetimes, literally, mm-hmm. Okay? Now, there's some that maybe last for a while, and maybe we fall short with it, or maybe we, as we could say, fall off. Like, say we have that transformational moment, we implement its changes that last 10, 20, maybe 30 years, but then it isn't completed, or we don't adhere to it or stay with it. And then there's some where we have the aha moment, as I would say, and we don't follow through. We just don't follow through. So there's different possibilities of what that aha transformational moment will lead to.
Does that tie into our karma and the lessons we need to learn?
Sure it does. It ties into several things. It ties into karma in the sense of whatever transformational change we're trying to implement would have to be supported by whatever our karmic lessons are. I mean, say karma is so compelling and so binding, really, that it would be like, say, if you're rowing on the water and that current is going with you, that's where your transformational moment and the karma can work together. And oftentimes, that's something that is spiritually very connected, where we're supposed to have that transformational moment. Karmically, we're supposed to. There's a time, or even, I don't want to even say time. I mean, a time possibly, yeah, but when our soul is ready. That could be when we're 30, when we're 40, when we're 50. The time may not be so strict in terms of a time frame. But it's also the idea that if the karma is working against it, it's hard to really do it. That would be the converse metaphor, that if the current is heavily going against us and we're rowing, how far are we really going to get?
So nature's supporting the transformational moment, just like nature supporting a decision, is a factor.
I think it's a huge factor. As people, oftentimes we get arrogant and we think that I've done this, like I became successful and I did this, but it's never just I. There's always a huge amount of factors as to why anything happens on Earth, whether it seems small or whether it's transformational. So it has to be supported by nature. When nature supports a decision, you know it's the right one. I mean, that's a phrase that I use over and over again because it's absolutely true. And the idea that with nature supporting it, then our job is to do our part. But it's never just that we can just decide our transformational moment and do it and always have it. There's more involved with it. And of course, like anything that is really happening in the physical plane, especially big things like this, it's multi-layered, it's multifaceted.
Is there anything that particularly makes a transformational moment last or succeed, or anything that makes them fail in particular?
Yeah, I think that assuming that the transformational moment is real. I mean, that it's really real, that it isn't like this sort of pseudo-realization that you think is big, but it isn't.
I had too much to drink, and
right. Or let's say somebody meets somebody, and they're just like really attracted to them, and they're like, this is it, this is the person I'm going to marry, but it's really a one-night stand. Okay, right. I mean, that's sort of a banal example, but it makes the point. I think if the transformational moment is real, if it's karmically supported, if nature supports it, and the person follows through with consistency, that really is going to most likely work and last and create a long-lasting change. Now, some transformational moments, we may run out of fire. We may run out of the fire in our belly. We may lose our motivation. That could mean that we get part of the way there, or, like I said earlier, it falls off. And then others, we just may not do it because I hate to use the word lazy, but let's say we don't follow through, we don't create a plan, maybe other distractions happen for us. So that's capable of unfolding in the long run in several different ways.
Now, is there a best thing that you can do after a transformational moment to give it a chance to succeed? Do you need to think about it for a bit? Do you need to jump into action?
Well, I certainly think to be impulsive with it is not good. I mean, I don't think that there should be transformational moment and then all of a sudden we're going to have every solution based on it within a day or 5 minutes or, a short time frame. I think the idea is to write it down, whether in a journal, in a book form, or online, say in a Word document, and then reflect on it for a while. Now, that time frame is variable, but let's say reflect on it for days, maybe even weeks. And then, if it is still real, right, it wasn't just one of these sort of pseudo-transformational moments, then it's the idea of putting a plan into action. And that plan needs to be practical, methodical, workable, and it needs to make sense. I've said this to clients before, the concept that if a plan is really good, whether we're talking being up in the clouds or being ascended or just trying to clean the house, whatever it is, it should make sense to a 10th grader. In other words, if you have a plan that is really good, you should be able to say it to a 10th grader and it will make sense to them. Just like when Ted Turner had his vision and it was, I want to do a 24-hour-a-day news channel, period. And that turned out to be CNN. Or when MTV said, we want to create a cable channel that runs video 24 hours a day, and MTV was born. And of course, both of those channels, CNN and MTV, revolutionized everything.
That kind of begs the question, are transformational moments, are they that basic or that simple? I mean, because those are very simple, clear concepts that you just talked about.
They're not necessarily simple or clear, but they can be a culmination of lifetimes. They could be a culmination of decades of struggle. But I think the aha moment is simple. In other words, that aha moment. Let's say, I'm assuming, and I'm not speaking for Ted Turner, but I'm assuming that he didn't just one day wake up out of bed and say, I think I'm going to do this cable TV channel.
Unless Spirit gave it to him.
Well, that's true. Unless Spirit gave it to him. So, but let's say if Spirit didn't give it to him, that it was something that may have culminated over a lot of work and desire and experience. So I think that, there's different ways the transformational moment could come. Sometimes Spirit just gives it, and it's just like, boom. It's there. I've seen people who have had those. I remember somebody who had a vision for a different type of a television channel, and it came to them from spirit walking down the street, and it was revolutionary. Okay, that can happen. They hadn't thought of it before, per se. But I think sometimes it happens that way, but a lot of times it's a culmination. But I think for sure, once the aha moment has happened, then it has to be allowed to develop, and a plan has to happen that is really reasonable and makes sense and is practical. Like, as an example, if somebody has this transformational moment based on the idea of, wow, I don't like where I live, I don't like my job, I can't take this anymore, and then all of a sudden they quit their job and they move across the country. Not a smart move. In most instances, I'm not saying, 100%, but I've seen people make those kind of moves that weren't really well executed and then potentially end up in a worse situation. In other words, the plan should make sense. And I think, look, we can always be happy for a blessing, like winning the lottery, but we can't base paying our rent on winning the lottery.
So being too impulsive with these changes can be one of the worst things that you could do.
Absolutely.
After a transformation.
I think so. And I mean, everybody has to decide what's right for them, and that's going to be up to them. Certainly, I'm not trying to create a rule book, but more showing the parameters and the options, but it varies person by person. I think being overly impetuous and overly impulsive after an aha moment is in most instances dangerous. I think it's better to say, okay, if this is really what I'm supposed to do, let's put it to the test. I'm thinking I'm going to move across the country. Do I have a job? Do I have job prospects? Do I have somebody to stay with? Do I have savings? In other words, those things have to be taken into consideration, because it's a double-edged sword in the sense that, and I've seen spiritual people do this in a way that is not good, where they think, okay, spirit is guiding me, miracles are happening, and they get too risky. They get too risky. I mean, in the same way you wouldn't say, I'm going to drive home and close my eyes because spirit can guide the car, right? We would drive the car. Okay,
right.
And the same way with these big life-altering changes, I think that it's always better to err on the side of caution, but honor the vision and honor the transformational moment and work with it, but work with it in such a way that doesn't put your life at jeopardy if possible.
This has been a lot to think about. I guess my final question on this is, how important is the transformational moment to our process of spiritually becoming?
I think it's very important. And I think it's something that all of us go through. In other words, there's no set number. Do we have 25 transformational moments in a given physical lifetime, or 1, or 2, or 3? It varies depending on how long somebody lives, their karma, what they're here to learn, etc., etc. But I think the transformational moment is very huge. And here's one essential reason why. Is because when we're in the physical body, okay, we have both darkness and light. And ultimately, we're trying to ascend to be one with God, one with the light. And that's a very, very slow process. There's no quick fixes for that. So say those transformational moments help us to really elevate ourselves closer to that light. Say if it's a realization that I want to serve the poor, I want to help the downtrodden, and that person goes and makes a huge change in this world that helps people, that has elevated them into the light. It has been a huge part of their spiritual process. So I think that it is absolutely important, especially in the sense that it helps us to rise, to ascend, to become more one with God.
This has been fascinating.
Well, thank you.
Do you want to remind everybody where they can get your book?
Why the Law of Attraction Isn't Working for You, my first book, can be found anywhere that ebooks can be purchased, on Amazon, on the Kindle. Check it out if you want to. It's a great book. If you've had confusion about why you can't manifest through the law of attraction, and if you want to have a reading with me, private consultation, feel free to visit jim1537.com, and I would love to hear from you. Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.